Pursuant to notice for purposes of markup, I call up HRES 488, a resolution supporting the people of Venezuela as they protest peacefully for democracy. Without objection, the measure is considered read and open for amendment at any point. Before recognizing myself and other members for statements, I'm going to call up Roslaton 39, the bipartisan amendment in the nature of a substitute, and ask unanimous consent that it be considered en bloc with the brief Salmon amendment that members have before them. Clerk, will you can just go ahead and without objection. Okay. Without objection, the amendment en bloc is considered read and open for amendment at any point. All members may have 5 days to insert remarks on this measure into the record should they choose to do so, and I now recognize myself to speak briefly on this bill and amendment. Our neighbor to the south, Venezuela, suffers from one of the worst murder rates in the world, crushing inflation rates of over 56%, regular electrical blackouts and shortages in everyday items such as milk, flour, and even toilet paper. All of this is in the face of a country who enjoys one of the world's largest deposits of oil reserves. Clearly, the Venezuela people deserve far better. For several weeks now, many of us have watched in horror as protesters in Venezuela who have taken to the streets peacefully express their frustrations and a desire for change. They've been brutally attacked by elements of their government and government-aligned thugs on motorcycles. This has led to the tragic death of at least 14 individuals, over 100 people injured, and many more who have been unjustly detained for exercising their universal right to voice their aspirations for democracy, for freedom, basic human rights, and adherence to the rule of law. We bring up this bipartisan resolution today in that spirit, and we call upon the State Department, the Organization of American States, and other parties in the Hemisphere to join us in pushing for an end to this useless violence, to fully support the rule of law, and to promote a more transparent democratic process in Venezuela. Although the world's attention has been focused more vividly on the crisis in Ukraine, the stakes in Venezuela are no less important. This is about freedom. It's a nation squarely in our very neighborhood, and until its most recent history had a long and proud tradition of adhering to democratic norms and was even an ally of the United States. Continued instability there adversely affects Venezuela and the entire region, and could well lead to violence and instability well beyond their boundaries. I want to thank the committee's chairman emeritus, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, for her undying support for freedom anywhere on the planet and democracy, but especially in our hemisphere, and for pushing for the passage of this timely and important resolution. Also want to thank the full committee ranking member Engel and subcommittee ranking member Albio Sirius for working with us to craft this solid bipartisan attempt to put our words and our voices behind those Venezuelans who aspire to make Venezuela a better country for their fellow citizens. And I now recognize the ranking member.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding this markup to consider this important resolution, calling for an end to violence and supporting the people of Venezuela's right to express their frustration to the deteriorating economic, public safety, and political conditions in the country. Rather than allow the space and freedom for peaceful demonstration, President Maduro has instead utilized oppressive Cuban tactics in silencing the media, detaining anti-government demonstrators, and arresting opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez. Like his predecessor, Mr. Maduro has also attempted to deflect unwarranted blame against the United States by expelling U.S. embassy personnel. And now, instead of peacefully mediating the differences with the thousands of anti-government demonstrators that have grown tired of rising crime, inflation, shortages of basic goods, and limited freedoms of expression, Mr. Maduro has proposed an oddly timed diplomatic exchange with our country. Mr. Maduro and the government of Venezuela need to address the grievances of its people through meaningful dialogue that respect the space and expression of contrasting points of view. I am particularly disturbed and saddened by the unfortunate loss of life that has resulted from the demonstrations and echo the international community's condemnation of Venezuela's government unnecessary and inappropriate use of force against the demonstrators. However, it is unfortunate that some nations exalting democratic virtues within a hemisphere can turn a blind eye to these physical and human rights abuses. I am a proud co-sponsor of House Resolution 488, supporting the people of Venezuela in its difficult and uncertain times. I join my colleagues and the international community in imploring the government of Venezuela to respect the freedom of expression and assembly and peaceful engagement of opposition. I thank my good friend Chairman Salmon and Chairman Emeritus Ross Layton for their leadership and steadfast efforts in advancing this resolution, which I urge my colleagues to support. Thank you.
Thank you. The Chair now entertains any other seeking recognition. The former Chairman of the full committee, Leanna Russell.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, for marking up this timely and important bipartisan resolution in support of the people of Venezuela in their pursuit of freedom and democracy. The situation in Venezuela, as we have seen, has rapidly deteriorated, so I thank you both, as well as the colleagues on the committee, to recognize the importance of supporting democracy in Venezuela. I also would like to thank the full committee chairman, Mr. Royce, and the ranking member, Mr. Engel, for their efforts, which have been instrumental in ensuring that this bipartisan measure enjoys the amount of support that it currently does. I'd like to extend my gratitude to the hardworking and dedicated staff members that have helped pave the way for this resolution. Tom Sheehy, Edward Burrier, Jason Steinbaum, Mark Walker, Leah Campos, Ramon Zertush, Eric Jacobstein, and so many others. Thank you, thank you. Resolution 488 is not about Venezuela. It's also about who we are as a nation. We often take for granted the freedoms that we enjoy as Americans, but when we witness events like those happening in Venezuela, where Maduro silences dissent by unleashing his state thugs on innocent civilians who march for freedom and democracy, killing and injuring those who have the temerity to call for reforms, we are reminded of just how great America is. And so when we see students of Venezuela take to the streets and take to social media, begging and pleading for the world to speak up and take notice, we have a moral obligation to stand up and support them. And that is what this resolution does. It tells the hundreds of thousands, even millions of Venezuelans who yearn for freedom and for liberty that the United States hears you. The United States knows what you're going through, and we will support you and support your fundamental human rights, because that is what America does everywhere. We speak up for those who are being silenced and oppressed. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution and to support the American ideals of freedom, justice, rule of law, protection of human rights. And I thank our colleagues in the Senate, Senators Bob Menendez, Marco Rubio, and Dick Durbin. They have a measure that mirrors ours. So this shows that this is a bipartisan, bicameral measure. I'm also writing a letter to President Obama. I'm asking for co-signers, requesting that he hold Venezuelan officials accountable for their human rights abuses. I'm asking President Obama, pursuant to applicable U.S. law, to deny visas to enter the U.S. to Venezuelan officials who commit human rights violations, block their property, freeze their assets in the U.S., prohibit them from conducting financial transactions with U.S. businesses and institutions. And in addition, I plan on introducing a bill next week that will codify these measures into law, and I urge my colleagues to support both of these efforts. And for this resolution, Mr. Chairman, that is before us, we have worked with our Department of State in drafting this resolution. Thank you very much for the time.
I thank the gentlewoman from Florida. Are there any other members seek recognition? Mr. Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come here deeply concerned about what's taking place in Venezuela. And for me, I thought it was important to be here because of my relationship with Venezuela in the past. Many probably know that I'm one of the few members of Congress that had a relationship with former President Hugo Chavez and happen to know current President Nicolas Maduro. But what I see taking place on the streets of Venezuela is not the expressions, or not allowing expressions of freedom and discontent to take place, and violence and death, deeply concerns me. I was in Latin America last week, and I talked to a number of heads of states from various countries, and they are deeply concerned. Some, believe it or not, who quietly are allies and had been working with Venezuela. But even they are concerned as what is taking place in Venezuela now. I think that I had a moral obligation to be here today to speak up against what is taking place. Because when I think in my own lifetime, when African Americans stood up in the streets to protest what they thought was something that was not democratic, we wanted someone to stand and say, take our sides or help us. Stand up and say what's right. So when I see that there's individuals, and I know that there's people in Venezuela on both sides of the issues, but everybody should have the right to express themselves. Everyone should have the right to try to make sure that they, too, have a voice. And when I see violence being utilized to stop the individuals from expressing themselves, and I know Venezuelans because I've been to elections and I've seen them line up, both the opposition and Chavistas, in huge long lines to vote. That's what should happen. And people should be able to go in the streets and express their discontent. Government should not come down and stop those or silence those voices, and people should not have to die. So we have an obligation, I do believe, when we see people dying in the streets simply because they want to express themselves. They want to express and put pressure on their government. That's what democracies are all about, putting pressure on your government. We have disagreements here, but we don't go into the streets. We don't allow the government. We don't want our government to utilize violence to silence those voices. So I felt compelled. Generally, I don't come and sign up with many of these resolutions. I looked at the resolution and I said, basically, it is a fair resolution. You can tell it is a resolution that was worked on in a bipartisan manner. And I just felt it was important to call on and the voices to be heard from all sides on this, especially my voice. You know, Dr. King said one time, you know, it's not those voices that were silent, that would not speak out against injustice, was concerning us most. There's clearly an injustice that's taking place now. And again, in the words of Dr. King, injustice anywhere is a threat of justice everywhere. So I join this resolution in a bipartisan manner, and I thank the chairman and the former chairwoman on how you worked it. I was told by the ranking member how you made sure that we were inclusive. You worked with the State Department. You made sure that there was language in there from both sides and tried to do it in a balanced way. So I come today to join that resolution, this resolution, and say, please stop the violence. Let the voices be heard. Let democracy ring. Let there be justice. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his impassioned speech. In many ways, as I look at what's happening in Ukraine and Venezuela, this is 1776. That's what's happening in their countries, and it's totally about freedom. And if we can't stand for that, then what do we stand for? Chair recognizes the gentleman. Jeff Duncan.
I thank the chairman and the former chairwoman for lending their voice to this, and so I strongly support the resolution. I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor. You know, multiple protests have occurred in Venezuela with thousands of people gathering to staunchly reject the status quo in Venezuela. In response to peaceful protests by students, President Maduro has lethal force that has used lethal force has resulted in the deaths of more than a dozen Venezuelans. Many more have been wounded and even more jailed by the regime. But I'm going to tell you what, Mr. Chairman, I'm inspired by a former retired military officer in Venezuela, General Angel Vivas, who stands in defiance at his own home, in defiance of his arrest by President Maduro. And he says here, I have the right to self-defense. He's become a folk hero for standing in defiance of the government. Economic conditions continue to worsen. There have been rumors that Cuban troops have been assisting the Venezuelan government in managing the protest. I'm concerned the U.S. government's not doing enough to stand in solidarity with the Venezuelan people who seek freedom and opportunity. And I second the comment you just made, Mr. Chairman, that this is Venezuela's 1776 moment. You and I have had the conversation that in the Ukraine and in Venezuela, folks are seeking self-governments. They're resisting oppression and seeking liberty. The U.S. has a strategic national security interest in Venezuela. It's in our hemisphere, but Venezuela is a mere 3-hour flight from U.S. soil, a major transit route for cocaine, heroin destined for the U.S. It possesses deep ties to FARC, Cuba, Russia, Iran, and it's allowed these actors access and influence in ways that are harmful to U.S. interest. Secondly, Venezuela has large proven reserves of oil, estimated in 2013 at 297 billion barrels. The economy in Venezuela should be more robust than it is. There's a Wall Street Journal front page article today that shows lines of Venezuelans in line for basic commodities at the supermarket. They've gone weeks, if not months, without toilet paper. The bread lines are very evident. But this article talks about President Maduro calling for carnival season to begin early, folks to go to the beaches and start partying. Is this not President Maduro's let them eat cake moment? When the folks in Venezuela are suffering, he has the opportunity and the power and the economy and the tools in the economy to do things differently. I think the United States has not only a vested interest, I think we have an obligation as the beacon of liberty in the free world to support the Venezuelans. I think that's what this resolution does. I think it's a great first step in urging the Department of State to take credible actions to respond to the erosion of freedom in Venezuela. I think we can do more. I have an amendment that I'm not going to offer today, but hopefully we can consider sanctions on Venezuela going forward. I think that's important. That's a tool that we can use. And so I want to end my comments with thanking you for your leadership on this issue. I want to thank retired General Vivas for his stance, inspiring Venezuelans, inspiring me as a beacon of someone that understands private property rights and understands what the word liberty really means. So I look forward to swift passage of this, and I yield back.
Boy, if the public out there doesn't understand in a bipartisan way that this group stands for freedom, they never will understand anything. Does the representative from Florida seek recognition?
Briefly, Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank the ranking member for working on this, and thanks to my friend from Florida for all her work. She's constantly supporting the freedom of people around the world, but particularly in our hemisphere. Look, the people of Venezuela are speaking out against the dysfunction and repression that's being brought about by the nation's Havana-directed socialist leaders. America should stand with the people in Venezuela. America should stand for individual liberty. And I'm happy to support this resolution so that Congress can demonstrate on behalf of the American people our solidarity with the people of Venezuela who are being oppressed by a corrupt regime. So thank you for working on this. Thank you for doing this. I do agree it's a good first step. This is a critical moment for them, and we have to be on the side of those who are aspiring to self-government and to individual liberty. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Are there any amendments to the en bloc amendment? Okay, hearing no further amendments, the question is on agreeing to the en bloc amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the en bloc amendment is agreed to. The question now occurs on adopting the H.R. Res. 488 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Again, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amended resolution is agreed to. Without objection, H.Res. 488 as amended is reported favorably to the full Committee on Foreign Affairs, and staff are directed to make any technical and conforming changes. That concludes our business, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.